Okay. I'm with Paul, Shirley. Everyone, welcome back to Walk-Ins. Welcome.
Hey, wasn't I like an early guest, like a really
You were
early
really
guest? Yeah.
Yeah. You're
Back
a
when
repeat guest.
back when we really didn't know what we were doing in Los Angeles.
No, we still were in Los Angeles. You were one of the, I wonder what number that was. I was going to look actually this morning.
I came to your house. I know that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was like old school.
Mm-hmm.
And we were audio only because we also didn't know what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've had a very smart person who runs networks be like, what are you doing, idiots? Because we had one show, Dumpster Fire, that was video only, and one show, this one, Walk-Ins Welcome, that was audio only. And he was like, anything you're doing, audio or video, should be both because you're leaving money on the table if you don't do both. Paul was episode 5.
Wow. It's like looking back at the old Hardy Boys mysteries. When I was a kid, I would always like try to like go back to the original Hardy Boys, the Two Towers or whatever it was, or the Hidden Tower or something. Two Towers is more Lord of the Rings, but I, as a child, prided myself in trying to burn through as many Hardy Boys books as I could.
I loved the Boxcar Kids.
Oh, the Boxcar Children? Yes.
Yeah.
That whole like idea of this idyllic living in the woods on your own, but it was still somehow safe because there's like an older sibling at all times to take care of you. Yeah.
This was like Swiss Family Robinson too, even though there were parents there, but it was still just this idea of like living in a sweet treehouse.
Which is maybe where we're all headed, actually, is back to a treehouse so that we can escape the perils of urban chaos.
Yeah, it's interesting because I saw somebody yesterday on Twitter and they were saying, you don't need to homestead. You just need about 2 acres to live outside of town, but close enough to have good Wi-Fi and enjoy and try and have a garden and just enjoy your life. And I was like, that's a little bit of the nice, that seems to be the sweet spot for me.
It is. I was talking to my mom. I was back home in Kansas. I'm from a tiny town in Kansas, and I say tiny town, but that's not really true because we lived in the country, and we really did have exactly 2 acres. And my dad drove into Topeka, Kansas to work, which was about 25 minutes away. And my mom and I were joking. I have 3 younger brothers. We're 6'9", 6'8", 6'8", 6'5", right? And nobody else in our family is tall. But we were raised eating the beef that we raised in the pasture, the eggs that we ate, a lot of vegetables from the garden. Not exclusively that, but I was telling my mom, I think like we were kind of pasture raised and organic before that was a thing. And that also explains how we got to be giants, right? But like back then in the 80s, nobody was talking about those things. It's just that we were kind of poor. Not like, I don't want to paint it like we were destitute, but we didn't have a ton of money. And so my parents looked at it as a way to save money, like raise our own food. And I think it had a lot of positive knock-on effects that I didn't realize and thought was quite uncool at the time.
You were like pre-Maha movement.
Yeah. P-Maha.
Yeah.
P-Maha.
Just normal living. Yeah. Until recently.
Yeah. So back then it was just Ma, M-A-H. It didn't have to be again. It was just like,
yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's just it is crazy when you look at how many the farming statistics in America, just how many people worked on a farm up to a certain point. And you were talking about this in was it in your newest book?
Maybe. Tell me more.
Talking about this?
Which part?
Just how many people worked on a farm?
Oh, right. Yes. I mean, that's kind of the thrust of this new book is that work has changed significantly in the last really 60 years. So if you go way, way back, all of prehistory, we hunted and gathered. That was work, right? You and I would go out, or actually I would go out and hunt the mammoth. You would be back home tanning the mammoth hides and like taking care of the kids or whatever, gathering some berries. Let's just, for the sake of argument, hunting and gathering. And then like 12,000 years ago, we discovered agriculture. And so then basically work meant go work on the farm, go plow the field, till the soil, sow and reap and all of that. And then came the Industrial Revolution 150 to 200 years ago. And then that changed us, but we were still doing kind of the same thing over and over. And then like 60 years ago, we brought in this whole revolution to the way we work, moving from like doing a thing over and over, whether that's hunting or plowing a field or making widgets, to now these huge projects that people have, which have left them, I think, feeling out of sorts because nobody has taught us how to make sense of those projects, right? So I will, again, if it's 400 years ago, standing in the field and plowing is not necessarily fun, but it's really easy for our brains to make sense of. If I'm like, I got to go plow 10 acres today, you do that, you're done, you go to sleep, right? But if I say to you, I need you to build a PowerPoint that's due 6 weeks from now, go. How do you break that into bits? When do you know it's done? And that's what a lot of people are wrestling with, that I think is causing a lot of discontent, where it's hard to make sense of logically. Like, where do I start? Where do I stop? And again, that idea of when is it done is difficult for people because you could kind of work on it forever. So I am marrying this idea of like what Stephen Pressfield talks about and what Cal Newport talks about, all of these people around the ability to break these huge projects into bits of focused work. But I look at it from the perspective or the lens of my basketball career. So basketball taught me if I wanted to get from here to here as an athlete, I had to do a little bit at a time, day after day. And I had to figure out also like how to kind of pace myself through that, because you wouldn't expect a basketball player to lift weights for 8 hours in a day, right? But somehow we expect our brains to do this stuff day after day. We get burned out and we tell ourselves like there's something wrong with us because we're tired or burnt out. When in reality, it's very much like athletics, where it's more about coming up with a sustainable pace and being a professional about starting and stopping, as opposed to this kind of gutting it through, filling yourself with guilt and shame, which is what most people do when they're trying to accomplish these things.
Yes, I'm quite familiar with all of this. Full disclosure, I've been working with you on a lot of the stuff that you write about in this book. So reading the book was fun because it got for me to actually, I think I just retain things better when I read them. And even though I've heard you say them to me a million times or even write them to me, not a million, but many, many times, it was helpful to see it in the context of just where you come from with basketball too. Because it's funny, even though I've heard a lot of this stuff from you, I still read it and go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And
and that's what's also fun about it for me, like writing it down, because none of us get that opportunity to synthesize our thoughts that often, right? So,
yeah.
If you guys are 350 or whatever the number was episodes in, there are certain things that you've said probably over and over, but the process or the job of sitting down and writing it into a book is really helpful even for me, because it's almost like I was creating my dissertation around this idea, right? Like I've taken all this stuff that has come at me, all of the ways that I've worked with people, all of my personal experiences, and put them into something that needs to be consumable, which I think is a rare opportunity, because most of the time we're kind of just spitting ideas at people as they come up. So first of all, thank you for saying that. But second, it was also, I don't want to say a joy. That's a little bit absurd, but it was really satisfying for me to get to put these all in one place.
Yeah, it's helpful for me too, because when I forget, it's what's really astonishing to me, and I see it even with the list of books at the back of your book that have inspired you. And I've been reading your book, been listening to Tony Robbins, just trying to bathe my mind in a success orientation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much of the same stuff, and I will forget it in between, let's say, driving down to do a set of comedy, thinking about why I'm doing this, which you talk about in your book, thinking about trying to put myself in a state of success or whatever, and then have a bad set because you can't control those uncontrollables at all, the crowd or my own level of anxiety or whatever. And then, my own level of stage fright, basically. And then be driving home and like, well, I should quit. We're talking about like a half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is one of those things that can you please explain why we cannot retain this information?
Well, one reason we can't retain it is because we're bathed in information in general, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's worth exploring This idea that right now, the statistic I've seen, and it's hard to know the exactitude of this, but the statistic I've seen is that right now we are exposed to 74 gigabytes of information every day, right?
That's nuts.
And that if it were, what's 500 years ago, 1525, we would have been exposed to that same number, 74 gigabytes of information in our entire lifetime. Right. Now, whether those statistics are exactly correct kind of doesn't matter. It's hard to really truly measure because it's hard to know, like we don't have a time machine. We can't go back 500 years. But I think it fits with what we're all feeling, which is that we're just inundated with all of this information, some of it good, some of it bad, a lot of it meant to distract us. And we can't help but be addicted to this because it's in our nature, right? So I talk about in the book, and you've probably heard me say this, that we think of ourselves as pretty big, strong animals, but compared to most of the animal kingdom, we're not really. Like compared to a rhinoceros or something, we're not like a spider that can crawl up a wall. The main thing we have going for us is our brains. We have big brains. That's why, we do most of our development outside the womb, unlike most animals. And so the thing that those brains allow us to do is detect threats all the time. We are protective of ourselves. Information is good in that context, right? Because it keeps you from getting into trouble. Like if the tribe is coming over the hill or there's a tiger nearby, you're able to be like, okay, we got to do something about this and work together to come up with a solution. But where we've gone is we've taken in so much information now that we almost have like informational diabetes. In the same way that when we introduced sugar had previously been rare. And we thought, if I can get sugar, I should get as much of it as I can. Right. Previously, it meant I got a fruit and that's good for my body. And now suddenly we had like processed and refined sugar and we didn't know what to do with it really. So we got fat people and diabetes. The same kind of thing is happening where historically all information was good because it was scarce. Now It is not scarce and we can't help ourselves from taking it in. I go through this all the time. Like, why am I still scrolling Instagram when I'm laying there on my couch? It's because in some ways, it's not just that I'm addicted to Instagram. It's that I'm addicted to like the potential for information. And obviously companies have figured this out and they've created this like distraction industrial complex, or DIC as it were. And they are making money from our inability to turn it off. And then that keeps us from being able to concentrate on the book that we read or retain this information. You've probably seen all this stuff floating around now about how using AI to write means that then you can't even synthesize a thought later. And I think it's like an accelerated version of what we're all doing, where we're just like bombarding ourselves with information all the time. And so it becomes difficult to sit still. Last thing I'll say about that is I went to a movie last night, doesn't matter, but it was interesting how uncomfortable I was sitting there with my phone finally off for the day and being forced by the movie theater and general human behavior to shut the hell up and just pay attention to this one thing. And I am effectively a guru of this stuff, right? Like I'm talking about this stuff all the time and I still struggle with it. So imagine what like just the average soul is going through in their attempts to sit and focus, write a business plan, make that presentation, write a book, whatever it is. And I think that's like, it's one of the great battles of our time coming up, is this ability to build some cultural rules about how we're going to get back to actually feeling connected, feeling a sense of meaning and forward progress in all of this stuff that we want to accomplish. Yeah,
that was one of the most powerful parts of your book in the beginning, that when I was reading, because for some reason it didn't, maybe you had said it to me, but it just didn't occur to me in that way, that I'll be really hard on myself for doom scrolling, as we call it now, I guess. But it is, like you say, that evolutionary instinct to get more information all the time is correct.
Yeah, it's baked into us.
Right. It's not necessarily wrong that we want to. It's just like I like the idea of informational diabetes. And I've noticed just my inability to focus on even like reading one page of a book it's definitely suffered from years of being online. And now you mentioned AI. I saw that study going around. I also saw somebody who's in who kind of took apart that study and saying that it wasn't a great study when you dug into like the methodology of the study. I kind of go back and forth on AI. I've had people who are very pro AI on this podcast, and people would argue that we didn't lose the ability to do math because we have a calculator, so is it a little bit, are we all freaking out about something that's not necessarily, that's just like another advantage for us? This is what the person who is kind of pushing back against it, he was saying, just because we're using calculators doesn't mean we're not using our brains. It's just that we're not using as much of our brains or working as hard as we might need to, but it gives our brains the ability to do other things. This is a kind of counter argument to this, but
that is actually, so when I was in high school and middle school, and you probably went through this too, the kids would say to the teacher, why would I ever use this? Algebra, calculus, etc. And they rarely did a good job of explaining it. They would just say, shut up and do it.
Right.
It was when I got to college, so my degree is in engineering, which is basically just math after math after math, that a teacher said, the reason you learn algebra and calculus and trigonometry isn't about the math, it's about problem solving skills. So yes, you use a calculator to maybe multiply 242 times 8, right? But that's you don't really need to use that. What you need to be able to do is the problem solving that comes from doing the algebra. And so in rare cases, I think artificial intelligence will be helpful for creating pipelines that are but that's not how people use it. Like, we have to be honest about how do people use it. They use it to write entire papers or entire emails, and that removes your ability to solve the problem of how to write an email or how to write a paper. I see this even so it's been interesting. We talked about how this book is kind of like my dissertation. The facility that I now have for being able to talk about this stuff because I wrote the book is profound even to me compared to 2 years ago, right? It's the job of doing the writing that allows me to make sense of it so that I can tell the story. You would be able to tell pretty quickly if I had just spit out a book, but I don't know what I'm talking about, because we would have this interview and I'd be like, well, let me check on page 97 about what I said about that. And I'm seeing that a lot with, like, whether this study is true or not. A lot of times we use studies and statistics to back up what we see to be true in the world, right? Because as we know, most of studies have been destroyed. I mentioned this in the book that, like, there's this huge replication crisis in academia where a large portion, almost a majority of studies cannot be replicated. So all of this shit we were raised on, like, well, this study shows, it's like a 50-50 shot as to whether it's true. I do think that, like, those give us a touch point to talk about things that we see to be true. So I run this workspace here in Denver. We've got about 130 members. And I can tell when people no longer have the ability to just exist and have conversations about things they know about because they've been using crutches of some kind, or they've just, like, lost that ability. So to me, maybe it's okay, but probably there's two cases. It's either okay or it's bad. It's probably, I think there's almost no chance that it's good for the individual to use artificial intelligence to substitute for creation. Now, is it good for potentially, like, I don't know, booking a hotel room? Sure. But, like, on a consumer side, it doesn't seem likely that it's going to further contribute to flourishing and general intelligence, which I would also say, like, all these, like, tech optimists, where have we gotten with the tech of the last 30 years? All I see is 70% of the US is obese or overweight. We have 2 million cancer diagnoses for the first time in a year. Something like 40% of people have been on an antidepressant in the last year. So, like, it ain't going great. So, like, let's maybe back off on adding more tech to our lives before we, like, settle out what we do have.
Yeah, it's weird though, because I know so many young people, and I was talking to a family member about this who has young adult kids, and it's I don't know how you put that genie back in the bottle. And I was even talking to a 21-year-old, and I said, it's a 21-year-old male. And I said, you and your friends still read books. And he said, why would I do that when I can just put the title into Chat GPT? And they see it as truly like, why would I take a horse if I could drive a car? That's their mentality about it, is that we're basically like, hey, but use the horse. It's great. It'll get you from A to B and you'll learn how to ride a horse. And they're like, screw you. We're taking the car.
Well, and they'll be real stupid because of that. So like if we were all trying to be race car drivers and I just said, well, you need to get from here to there, just take an Uber, you wouldn't learn how to drive a car. We are trying to we're trying to connect to each other, and our ability to read books and watch movies and have conversations is what makes us human. And where I think this is all going is there will be I was going to say cultural revolution, but that implies a certain communist path from China. But there will be a revolution culturally where we will put guardrails back into place around presence and human connection. That will probably have to come from someone who's older and who has seen all of this and is able to say like, hey, look, I would be all for this if it were making people happy, but it doesn't seem to be making people happy. Like all I see is there's this, like, I live in an apartment complex here in Denver that is 300 units. A lot of the people have work from home jobs. A lot of them are in tech sales. If people are not familiar, Denver used to be like a weed smoking mountain town. It is a tech and finance town now, which makes me sometimes regret moving here, but whatever. I had to get out of LA. You had to get out of LA. That's like how it went. But I sense this, like, it's not just that people are unsettled. It's this kind of like fragility and brittleness to people where they're unsure of social encounters. They seem jittery at all times. And to me, that just can't last. So you mentioned putting the genie back in the bottle. I think we also have to start taking a much longer view of human history in a very annoying way for a guy. I'm reading this like history of Rome, of the early Roman Empire right now. And if you think about like all the things that they managed to put together in ancient Rome, I know I am the meme. All the things we put together in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, but then we lost sight of in the Dark Ages or whatever, which again, we can't know what life was really like then. But we have this tendency to think that like everything goes like this, when in reality it's cyclical, right? So we will, I think, I'm very optimistic that we will get back to building in cultural guardrails around that tech that you're using is fucking stupid. Like it's actually like not cool to use that, right? So we will switch it at a certain point, and what will be cool or normal is to sit around and talk to each other and to share ideas through the written word or whatever, right? I don't know exactly what it'll be, but it will always come back to connecting people and helping them think hard about big subjects, which is what we want to do as humans. And so if tools can help us with that, so if I don't need to go on to Expedia to book my hotel room, if I can just say to a bot, like, hey, I need a hotel room in Des Moines in 3 weeks, get that done. Okay, great. That doesn't seem to me like that's all bad. But if it's substituting for the slog of reading a book, then that's just not good. There are certain points where we have to just stand up and say, like, that shit ain't good, right? Like in the same way that Moses came down with the 10 commandments or made up 10 commandments and came down from a mountain and said, like, you shouldn't kill each other. At a certain point, you have to say, hey, dipshit, don't do that. Like, we live in a world that's like, we've been so permissive for the last probably 50 years around kind of our, Bridget, you can respect this, the like free to be you and me generation that hit in the like late 60s and 70s, which is on its face good. It led to the self-esteem movement and stuff. It came from a positive place. But now I think people are actually kind of aching to be told, like, don't do that shit anymore. It sucks. Like, it's just bad for your brain. In the same way that we would say, if you just poured a quarter cup of refined sugar down your throat, I'd be like, are you insane? Like, that's just not good for you. Don't do that, idiot. I think we have to like kind of get back to that. Like, hey, I'm on this elevator with you and yeah, it's uncomfortable, but don't get on your phone, you jackass. Like, let's just ask me about my day and we'll, make a connection here. I think it will come to like a little bit of societal pressure around this stuff. And it's not going to come through regulation. It's not going to come through government. It'll come from a kind of cultural awareness that people are just not doing that well.
Right. Like smoking,
Yeah, totally.
where it just became gross.
Right.
And then the rules followed, like the outlying it followed, but the cultural grossness around it kind of came first, I think.
Yeah, I've heard you say this, and this is an older quote than both of us, that politics is downstream of culture, right?
Yeah. Guys, getting older sucks. That's why it's so important to take care of yourself and pay attention to your health. This is something a lot of men ignore, and it is so important. If you hate going to the doctor and dealing with the hassle, we've got the perfect solution for you. With Quest Health's line of tests for men, you can order a multitude of men's health panel tests that keep you informed about your health. You can check your testosterone levels, get a prostate screening, a colorectal screening, or take their comprehensive men's health profile test for a more complete picture of your health and wellness. Purchase lab tests online, visit a nearby Quest Diagnostics location for a sample collection, no doctor's visit required, or get immediate results at home with at-home test kits. Your results are delivered online, quickly, and discreetly. So prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code Phetasy to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code Phetasy for 25% off.
I'm having a lot of conversations with people who are like, I do not want to have a smartphone anymore, right? Like, I just want to have a flip phone. Now, they haven't quite made that move yet, but in the same way that, like, it was interesting watching the proverbial vibe shift politically and how that cascaded really quickly, kind of pre-Donald Trump election, right? Like, everybody was talking about, like, the vibes have shifted, but it shifted really quick. I think that will happen with this stuff, where we will look up and we'll be like, well, of course this stuff was bad for us. Like, why did we buy into this? And we may be able to, it's not going to be putting the genie back into the bottle exactly, but we will reckon with, like, which technologies actually help us, right? So I do a fair bit of, like, consulting work with companies, and it's amazing to me just how many things they've all signed up for,
Right.
Whether it's like Monday.com or they have Slack or Asana. You're like, they're not all going to last, right? So let's start picking out the pepper from the fly shit, as it were, and figuring out, like, probably email sticks around. That's a pretty good technology, but it's still very new to us, right? Like, to me, a voice text is kind of amazing. We can have this, like, asynchronous conversation with some nuance and context, which is super cool. And we'll probably text because that's good for, like, setting things up. But we aren't going to keep all of this stuff, and that's fine. That's how, like, evolution of information works. In the same way that, like, we kicked out the laser disc at a certain point.
Right. Yeah. The process is so important. You know, just not the process TM your company, but just the actual process. For me, writing is how I work out how I think about something. It's just truly how I work it out. So to outsource that would be doing myself a disservice in making an attempt to synthesize information like you had to do for your book.
Right. Think about you doing comedy. If you said, hey, AI, Purse bot, Chat GPT, whatever, write me a joke about brick buildings. I'm staring at a brick building. That's why I said that. It could write you a joke, and it might actually be able to write you a good joke. But it's the job of coming up with the joke and understanding why it's funny to you and why it fits into a set and all of that, and why you're going to be present on stage and deliver that particular joke at that time that is irreplaceable. And if you take a shortcut on that, it A, won't work, and it B, won't provide you with meaning. This is like I'm starting to, in my own head, sound like I don't know, someone religious almost. But what are we after with all of these shortcuts, right? So go ahead.
Go on. I was gonna say, before we go off, before you talk about meaning and sounding religious, I think more likely than people kind of having this cascading, like, that's like smoking, is that there's going to be a group of people who decide that AI is demonic, and more people start believing that. That
Yeah,
seems to
it could
be
Well, I think like
like the way, because we were joking about this on Dumpster Fire yesterday, just how I'm like, we're in the Middle Ages. I was joking about Tucker and how he said he was scratched by demons, and everyone was like, oh, whatever. And then I tweeted about it and it went viral. And the number of people in my mentions that were like, no, this is absolutely a thing. I was like, oh, we're back in the Dark Ages. So my feeling is that if you actually do present it as something religious, you'd probably get
no,
further along than if you were like, hey, no, this is bad for you.
I wholeheartedly agree. It frightens me a little bit because I grew up Methodist of all things, which is like the lightest of religions there is. And I sat there in church and I was like, this is all stupid. And I became like fiercely atheist. What I have seen out of the world now that I'm a little more mature is that, all of those were just like allegories and stories. So if we talk about, this idea of a commandment where God basically says like, you should only worship me, you shouldn't worship yourself. We are effectively worshiping ourselves in our narcissism that's bred by social media and making ourselves the center of attention. Now, what does God mean? I would say it's like wholeness and oneness. That's a bigger question that this is not the religious podcast. What I was going to say about this idea of meaning is, one thing I see a lot in the world is we've created all of these shortcuts, all of this stuff that saves time. But why are people still so busy? Right? Like it's fascinating to me that we have all of this stuff that like can speed things up, and yet we're all in a hurry. You see it in the streets. Like, just pay attention to like how angry people are when there's like bad drivers. And I'm guilty of it too, right? Of thinking like, well, I'm here in this grocery store. I got to get in the shortest line to be the most efficient I can. Why? Like, who cares, right? But we've kind of trained ourselves, and this is not your fault and my fault. It's not necessarily anybody's fault. It's this Americanism of individuality, of speed, of efficiency, which I think we have to reckon with, again, not politically necessarily, but just like culturally and among our friends, and talking about like, is this really what we want? One thing I see a lot in my world, because I played sports, people think, oh, he's going to be like really hard driving around, helping me get stuff done like efficiently and productively. What's interesting about sports is it's a lot more like art than people realize, in that there's a lot of just kind of woo-woo being present to it. There's this like systematic sense of, I got to lift these weights today, I got to shoot these baskets, I got to run these sprints. But once the game arrives, it's really freeing and so much about like being in the moment, much like doing comedy is, much like giving a talk is, much like most of the great things in life. And what I'm often trying to get people back to is the human side. So creating these systems so that you can be more human at all times, right? So like you're doing less of the scut work of the just like kind of mechanical stuff, so that when you sit there to write poetry for 20 minutes, you can be totally present in the writing of that poetry. And that when you're done, you don't feel guilty because you didn't do enough, or you don't think about like, was it good or was it bad? Back to your comedy set, when you're driving home, you're not thinking, oh, I didn't make people laugh. You're thinking, was I present? Did I feel connected? Was I talking about things that mean something to me? I, Bridget, like to make people laugh. I, Bridget, am interested in how we can like connect to each other through comedy. And that's what matters. Now, let me use a little bit of a system to evaluate my presence and my ability to connect, not so much the results of it, which is why I talk so much about, like you said, the process, like thinking about, we all love the doing. It's just removing barriers and coming up with systems so that we can do that doing.
Well, and you talk a lot in your book too, and I appreciate it, about just dealing with failure.
And the value, I was driving from Kansas City up to Iowa, and I stopped at William Jewell College, which is in Liberty, Missouri. And that's the place where, when I was in high school, we would always play AAU basketball there. And for those who are familiar with like summer basketball in high school, you play 4 games on Saturday, and then on Sunday you play until like there's a champion. And I was thinking about just that power of iteration, in that because we played so many games, which was probably too many. Like one summer, I remember after my junior year of high school, I think I played like 94 basketball games, which is more than an NBA season. And it's hard on a 17-year-old's body, but it was great for my brain because the 2:00 game happened and I got dunked on by Corleone Young. But then at 4:00, I got to try again. Right. And like do this thing again and see like, oh, what can I modify about that? Which again is very similar to you doing like comedy every week. The more often you do it, the more reps you get, the better able you are to not only iterate, but also manage that failure piece that you talked about of like, yeah, I failed, but like there's another try. One thing I see from people is because they put so much weight on the results of this project. So let's think about this mythical 6-week project I gave you where you have to come up with like a PowerPoint after 6 weeks. They put so much emphasis on what happens after 6 weeks that it becomes paralyzing to start again. Whereas if you're able to say, all I have to do is 20 minutes on this today, and I'm going to judge how quickly did I get into it? Was I present? Did I stop when I said I would? Those are things you can evaluate and iterate and think about, even down to like, how focused was I? Well, how did I sleep last night? How did that affect my ability to get into it? Those are ways you can create these little bouts of success or failure that are, you can then modulate them over time, as opposed to these huge cliffs that I think people go through now where, well, that sales talk didn't go well, so now my whole life is ruined. The answer is, well, you need to have 100 of those, of course. And sometimes that's not possible. So figuring out ways to create little bits of success and failure in your life at all times, I think has a lot of value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think too, when you keep doing it with time, you realize that so much of it doesn't matter. Not being in terms of the results. Like I constantly have to tell myself, well, we can always iterate. We can always get better. We changed our set. That is, Rick Rubin reading his book. It's just like your job is to just keep improving your art, improving whatever it is. You're improving your skill and letting go of all of this stuff around any kind of results, because you really can't control it. And when you're doing stuff, like we're on episode 300 of this podcast, and I'll often tell myself, and my therapist and I will have conversations about this. She's like, the story you make up isn't necessary. I'll be like, I'm bad at being consistent. And she's like, well, how many Thursday podcasts have you put out? How many dumpster fires have you done? How many days of sobriety have you put together? There are areas in my life where I'm very consistent, and for some reason I can't. It's like I still want to beat myself up for not being consistent in this other area. And I think that's something that's really interesting that you get at too. And in the process is, well, what am I getting from feeling shame around this? What is it? Or why do I need to be motivated by procrastination? That thinking of, I was always such a like binge user of drugs and alcohol, but also just binge artist, that I would go into the first script I ever wrote, I just wrote it while I was drinking a bottle of Jack in a corner. I was like very just a binge, feverish kind of writing, and having that, showing up, doing the work, the practice of it. It does not come naturally to me. Now, I look at my husband. I was saying this right before we came on. I was like, whenever I read Paul's book, I'm like, God, my husband's so naturally good at this. Like, he can sit down and focus and get everything done off his list, and knows how much time he's going to spend on something, and he schedules everything. And I can't just throw something at him and be like, hey, let's record this now. He's like, no, we need to set a time for it, and I have to be mentally ready for it. And it does not come naturally to me. So are there people that you see in your work that just naturally have this ability more than people like me, who are like ADD bonkers people?
I think it's worth mentioning that two things. One is, because I'm talking about this stuff and thinking about it, and I've started 2 businesses now that are entirely around like structure and helping people get stuff done, that people then think, oh, Paul, your brain must be hyper structured and like you must think in a really orderly way. But my brain is a mess. And so probably I'm trying to heal my own wound by talking about all of this stuff and working through it. I think it's also worth saying that I had to come to something of a rock bottom in my own life a couple of times around the way that I worked, which at first was around basketball, right? So when I first started playing basketball, I played it because it was an escape from baseball, right? Like I grew up playing baseball. I found that basketball, I just like, it made a little more sense to me. I could do it on my own, whereas with baseball, you have to collect a whole bunch of people to do it. And I did it because it felt good, right? Then, as is always the case with anything creative or artistic or probably even sports, I started to think about what other people thought about the way I played basketball. And so for about, call it 7 years, from the end of high school through college and into the first couple of years as a pro, I played basketball motivated by a fear of failure, basically running from just being scared all the time. And in a lot of ways, I was like an addict in that I was like a workaholic when it came to sports. I was probably kind of OCD about it. I would shove all of my pain and anything that I felt bad about into, well, I can go fix this on the court and then people will like me, right? Which is not a great setup, but I didn't know that at the time. I was just getting through it. It wasn't until, and you know this story, Bridget, but I will tell it for those people who haven't. When I was playing for the Chicago Bulls, I had my kidney and spleen ruptured in a game. And in fact, probably put myself into that position. I was trying to take a charge, which means draw an offensive foul on a Pacers player. And probably did that because I thought I have to do everything right. I'm a hyper perfectionist, even about the way I play basketball. Have my kidney and spleen ruptured on the plane ride back to Chicago. The trainer later told me, he's like, I thought you might die. And I also thought I might die because it hurt so much that I was like, I would rather be dead than to hurt this much anymore. From there, met this guy, Scott Wedman, who became kind of my basketball guru. He had been an NBA player himself. He not only changed the way I looked at basketball, but also just about like doing stuff and got me back to presence, into judging success and failure objectively instead of emotionally, less about like, I'm a bad person because I missed that shot, and more like, oh, I was a little off balance, so the shot went right. So therefore I'm going to reevaluate how I do this. And then I kind of went through that again in my writing career after publishing a first book in the middle of basketball, thinking that like you, I could just binge write my way to success, that I could do it in a way that was often kind of mean too. Like I didn't really know how to like construct things. So I would rely on just like being as snarky or shitty as possible. And that also required a kind of rock bottom where this editor told me like my second book that I had worked on for several years just wasn't really good enough, which was a great gift. I actually posted about that one time. And she thought I was being mean to her, but I was actually, no, you did such a huge favor to me by telling me like I didn't know what I was doing. And so I had to reconnect to that same like thought that I had about basketball, or that same lesson I had gotten from Scott Wedman around, it's not about gutting your way through. It's not about like shaming yourself and filling yourself with all this guilt all the time. It's about creating these systems and being objective about what works and what doesn't. And so I think I can help kind of anyone get to that, in part because I had to go through that journey myself of thinking that I knew the answer, and the answer was drive yourself through fear of failure, through shame, through guilt, all of that. And probably your husband has gone through something similar, but it just now appears that he's really good at it. And that's something I see a lot, where people will say, oh, you must just come by this naturally. And maybe I do, in that my brain was wired to learn that lesson, but it really took a bunch of lessons before I could get there.
Well, no, and he himself will admit that when I say that to him, he'll say, well, I have to be this way to manage my own anxiety about things. He himself will say that it's his way of kind of a coping mechanism of being hyper organized. And it also seems to be, I talk to a lot of female comedians, and they seem like they're all married to very similar type guys, where we'll joke about how like my husband's side of the bed looks like I married someone in the military, and mine is like, looks like a teenager lives in the bedroom. Like it's just a disaster. And I try to be more like him in many ways, in terms of just, he's so inspiring to me. But he's read also all these books like Atomic Habits and a lot of the books that you mentioned. And he, I think, is very good at implementing. He likes systems. He thrives in systems.
But isn't that also the power of the dyad that you guys have built, right?
Yeah.
The masculine and the feminine, and like,
Mhm.
this is, I actually see, so in Los Angeles, at the workspace I ran there, I think we were probably 70% female.
Mhm.
Here in Denver, it's more like 60%. But what I see is that a lot of women come to us for that kind of masculine energy of the structure and the accountability. What's interesting is it often takes quite a bit of self-reflection for them to get to the point where they see that they need that. So like, it's hard to admit that you need that structure and accountability. But conversely, I would say this is actually kind of fascinating to me. So we talk here about structure, accountability, and community in this workspace. So oftentimes the women think that they're coming for the community aspect, but really what they want is the structure and the accountability. The men think they're coming for the structure and the accountability, but what they really need is the community, but they are often unable to admit the thing to themselves, right? Because it's like the men won't say, I'm lonely, so I need community. So they'll be like, oh, I need structure and accountability. And you're like, well, actually, but I mean, we don't need to say this to them because they just find it on their own. But I think it is that the power, and this is the beauty of that male-female relationship, of course, is that we take these various things from each other, and it's being willing to admit, like, yeah, I'm not real good, Paul, at relaxing or just like being present. So a female influence in my relationships has helped me so much in being able to do that, and that's wonderful. And that's a superpower that women often have. A superpower that men often have is kind of a unilateral way of thinking and building structure, and that historically we saw that those were equally good and that we needed both of them. We have gotten hyper kind of afraid to talk about these things because we're like, wow, I don't want to generalize, but like, who gives a shit at this point? Like, yeah, we need these things. Like, that's just how it is. I happen to be really good at that now, not that I always was, but I happen to be good now at creating structure for people. And lo and behold, a lot of the people that I work with are women who, and honestly, I will get a lot of like divorced women who probably are missing that in their lives, who come to me because they need that thing. They don't quite know why. They're just like, I got to get something done. Can you help me get stuff done? And then we will build them systems, and they're like, what a relief. Somebody who I can offload some of that like willpower and structure to.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because just today I was thinking like, man, if anything happened to my husband, I would be so lost. I would be like, oh gosh,
and
what am I doing?
That's a delightful situation, I think. I don't know. Like you and I are not really old enough to know exactly what happened in the 60s and 70s, but it feels like something broke where we started to just convince ourselves we don't need anybody. We can do it all on our own. And I have been hyper guilty of that. Like I had such a hard time asking for help. The help I needed was different than maybe the help you, Bridget, needed. But we both, I think, struggle with this because, again, there's this element of like guilt and shame around perfectionism that we like should be this whole being on our own, as opposed to doing what people have done for 100,000 years, which is like seek out other people who are good for them and help them move through the world.
You might have seen him on Walk-Ins Welcome, but have you checked out Brad Palumbo's podcast, Brad versus Everyone? It's a 25-minute daily show where Gen Z journalist Brad Palumbo takes on the craziest ideas on the internet, in media, and in politics. Brad covers stories you won't hear about in mainstream media, from social media trends landing some young people in jail, to the progressive media darling whose public meltdown got her fired, to the TikTok boycott against Target that makes no sense. He also pushes back on far-left extremism in the LGBT community from the perspective of a moderate gay man. But Brad also isn't afraid to disagree with the GOP or push back on far-right commentators who take things too far. Listen to Brad versus Everyone on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Do you think there will be a backlash? I see it coming. I'm just wondering what your opinion is on this optimization culture. Do you feel like there's, everything is like optimize. All the like podcast bros are always optimizing, and everybody's optimizing their sleep and their stats and all this stuff. I remember this book. I'm sure you've read it. It's about a lot of the independently wealthy artists and their schedules. It's like Daily Habit or something like that.
Yeah, Daily Rituals, I think, by
Daily
Mason
Rituals.
Curry. Yeah, who's a great dude. I've actually had him on a podcast I used to do. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's great because you see how much time they were not optimizing. They were just taking long walks and going to cafes and observing. And again, many of them were independently wealthy, so there's always that. But there were not everybody was, and they did seem to recognize that they need that time to just let their brain relax and do its thing while you're leisurely checking out some art in a museum. What are your feelings on kind of optimization culture? Because the interesting thing about the process is that there's very much this idea of structure that's necessary, and measuring the time that you spend and the words and how focused you are, and looking at things that you can. There's a little bit of optimization culture in it, but it seems like what I always take away from you is no one's writing for 8 hours a day, an actual 8 hours.
Right. If you did, I always laugh so for people's clarity, in Los Angeles, I ran a space that was just for writers. In Denver, we have realized it's not just writers who need what we do. It's all freelancers, hybrid workers, entrepreneurs. But in LA, I would be around people who would say, yeah, man, I write for 5 hours a day. And I'd be like, well, you should have 3 novels done this year. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, and then you get into it and they're like, well, I spend like 45 minutes dinking around on Facebook. And then then I'll write for 15 minutes. And so what I would say, back to this idea of like flourishing and kind of your point around anti-optimization, what I want from people is this like hyper present feeling that's pretty addicting, that is sometimes a flow state, right? Sometimes we get into true flow state, but other times it's just like we're focused and we're locked in on this thing. And that if I can show people you can do this for 25 minutes at a time, and that's enough, whether you're working on a book or that mythical PowerPoint that I keep talking about, or you're working on you're like writing jokes, like you're working on a really intense letter that you need to write to your mom because you're worried about her having Alzheimer's, whatever the thing is, right? That hyper presence is really valuable, not only because it's optimizing your ability to get stuff done, but also because then you can walk away from it and do other stuff with your life. One thing we see here at the process in Denver, so we host sessions that are hour and a half of work time and then a debrief. And then we just do that throughout the day. People will come in thinking that they're going to need a lot more hours. We are on a tiered membership basis, right? They think, well, I should probably do the unlimited membership. And then they'll realize like, I can get everything done in an hour and a half. And so like part of the reason you can believe that I'm telling the truth about you can do it in a short amount of time is because it works against my business model, right? Yeah. So it would actually make more sense for me to keep people here longer. But what I'm showing them is they can condense it into an hour and a half. So on the optimization front, I would say this. I've been noodling with the word elegance a lot lately in terms of moving through our days with an air of elegance. And that means working intensely in these short bursts, but then walking away from it and feeling this sort of lightness that I've observed with a lot of people, and I observe with myself when I'm working the right way. Again, I have to admit that I often fall into the trap of thinking that I need to gut my way through and use kind of a brute force method, because we're all guilty of that. But when I can get people to these ideas of lightness in terms of all I need you to do is work for 20 minutes on this, and then I do not want you in a meeting for an hour and a half. I want you in a meeting for 15 minutes. I want you on a call that lasts 10 minutes. I want you to record a video that explains what you need from somebody so that they can watch it on their own time and respond to you in kind. I don't want you doing this stuff that's just like beating down your brain. That's not elegant. That's inelegant. So how can we introduce that idea of maybe, yes, let's optimize when we can optimize, and we should probably cook ourselves a pretty good breakfast, and we should probably meditate for 6 minutes, and we should probably move our bodies, but we don't have to like obsess about that. And that additionally, we can bring back a little bit of some degree of celebration. The thing I see here in Denver is there's this like pretty massive like anti-alcohol movement, just among
it's
everybody.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that you, of course, don't drink, but for most people,
Binging.
there's this need to occasionally let loose and just like connect to people. That throughout history, we would have these feasts where people like ate too much and drank too much. So remembering that, like, what is the point of all of this? If we're just going to be like at our optimized all the time, who cares, right? I drove from Des Moines to Denver in a day recently, and it took me, it's a 10-hour drive, right? But it took me 15 hours because I stopped so many times, which drives my friends crazy. Even as I was driving, I was thinking to myself, I got to get back on the road. But the question is why? Like, why do I need to get there faster? Right? Like, does it matter if I arrive at 10 versus 9? Not really. I had this really cool conversation with this couple in Ogallala, Nebraska. Their daughter died 2 years ago. She like drank herself to death because she started in COVID. And it was fascinating how it had brought them together, and that we got to talk about this idea of connection and all of that. And I will continue to repeat, that doesn't mean I'm good at these things, but when I do, I'm like, wow, Paul, that was the point. Like taking that extra hour to talk to that couple in Ogallala, that's the whole point of being around. And that, yes, we do have to come up with like some ways to get all of this stuff done that we need to get done, but it's not about sitting at your desk for 8 hours at a time. It's not about being on a 2-hour call fucking ever, because that's brutal. It's about like being as light and I would say elegant as possible.
So I guess my feeling when you talk about that, a couple things. One, I'm writing a column about this, the collapse of drinking, basically, because there is this sense that if my cousin Maggie actually always says this. She took like a drugs and alcohol class in college, and the woman said if alcohol was introduced to the market, it would never make it to market because it basically your body treats it like poison the minute that it gets in, particularly like hard alcohol, not necessarily wine, but some of the harder stuff, and tries to get rid of it instantly. So I think a lot of people who are optimizing in this culture, but as someone who has gone completely abstinent because I've never been able to manage my alcohol in any kind of, and I tried everything, any kind. People were like, "Can't you have just one?" Like, you don't think I tried that?
I didn't think
forever.
of that.
Yeah. Thank you for not recognizing that I wouldn't have tried that forever. And also, I never saw the point of one, and that's how I kind of. And also, when I quit and realized that I could really not drink, I feel lucky that that's my thing because I can just remove the substance. And a lot of people who have behavioral addictions, it's much more challenging to stop, or like eating or something like that we have to do. I feel lucky to be able to go, well, I tried for many years to regulate and I just can't. Once I start drinking, something goes off in my brain and I don't see the point of having one. But I always say when I'm joking about it on stage or talking to people about it, I'm like, no, drink. Like that's one of the oldest things we have in human history is a record of beer. It's like an inventory from beer from some Sumerian, like hieroglyphics or whatever. And I think a lot about Dave Matthews, like eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we die. There is this sense of like you're gonna optimize like Brian Johnson and then what? Get like hit by a bus, or we don't know. We don't have any control over how this is all gonna end. And optimization culture seems to, like to your point, doesn't take any of that into consideration, that we need to celebrate or have a reward for working hard. But one of the things that occurred to me when you were talking about just kind of brooding our way through work is that that also feels kind of natural. I mean, I don't think people were just in the farm being elegant and doing their work elegantly. I think that is more of a modern solution to our modern work. So part of me feels like it's very natural for me to, when I was doing like trim work on farms, it was actually it felt like it activated some kind of gathering. Like I could sit there for 12 hours and do that work, which was crazy. And you would go bonkers doing it, but for months and months and months, we would sit there and do this insanely repetitive work. And it felt like something ancient in me was activated that gave me the ability to sit and focus and do that kind of repetitive work for long hours. But it was more of like a mental meditation. You know, it wasn't something I had to really kind of, and when we were in the farms working, it was not easy work. We had to kind of push ourselves through it.
I agree that there's something about my mom and I joke all the time about like wishing we could just work at a grocery store as a checkout person for a week, because it just seems very mindless and like that seems easy for our brains.
I mean, that's what my husband did for 15 years.
Hell yeah, love that.
You can talk to him about it though.
I do think
it's mindless.
Yeah, for 1 week is what I said, not for 15 years. That sounds bad. I do think like there's this snippet from the Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, right? Where people talk, they will quote it. They quote it mistakenly. Actually, they will say they're referencing this idea of life was short, brutish, and something else. I'm not getting the full quote, but actually the full context is he's like, without government or some level of authority, life is brutish and short, right? Like that we all need this government thing. So anyway, people will transpose or use that quote to talk about all of ancient life as it was like brutal and short and all that. But there's some evidence that like in our hunter-gatherer days, we didn't work very much. We just like would go hunt and gather and then come back to the
chill out
circle and just sit, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's kind of the elegance that we're aiming for, in the sense that in those days, if you're trying to hunt the mammoth, there was pretty high stakes on whether you get the mammoth or not, right? But when you're done with it, there's not more mammoth catching that needs to be done. You're just done.
Right.
When we introduced farming, which some would make the case is like our great mistake, we introduced like this need to work for really long periods of time because it was just like repetitive and it rewarded a lot of effort. The kind of work we do now, I think, is a lot more like the mammoth hunting, where it's more about like being precise and doing it correctly, but then fucking off and doing something else because we have that opportunity. I think people kind of conflate the two work styles. And so now they're doing something that's really cognitively difficult. It's hard to sit still and concentrate. There's pretty good evidence that we can really at the max concentrate for like 45 minutes to 50 minutes, which is probably why our classes were often about that length when we were in school, right? Mm-hmm. In reality, it's probably more like 17 minutes. I can back this up with like watching people day after day after day, where they will work for 40 minutes. They will get up, get coffee, take a bathroom break. Like it is a crazy kind of habituation. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of all we can do with our brains. Our bodies are different, though. We can push ourselves through standing behind a plow for a lot longer. And we can also recognize getting tired kind of more readily. Like just that sense of like, well, I got about 2 more hours of mowing in me and then I'm going to fall down. Our brains are a little bit harder to manage because we're trying to meter with the same mechanism that we're using to do the work, which is really complicated. And someday maybe we'll get better at that. But I think in general, if you think about optimization, I guess what I would say is like, let's optimize the way we live as a whole. Mm-hmm. And that is going to require a fair bit of rest. I got the opportunity to live in Europe for a long time, in Spain and Greece and Russia, and like seeing how Spanish people work, where they work hard in the morning.
Yeah.
But they go take a nap, right? And then they come back. They have noticed, and I think we can all kind of recognize this, that a lot of times we're really good in the morning. We hit an afternoon doldrum, and then we're actually kind of good in the evening again, maybe not quite as good as in the morning. And they've just like embraced that as a society because they're a much much older culture than us. Whereas we're like, I can't do much, but I better have that 2 p.m. coffee and then I won't be able to go to sleep tonight. I was joking with somebody the other day about like also thinking about living in Spain. It's easy to romanticize these things, but I think there's some value in observing and incorporating what you can. That idea that like, they'll go to dinner at 10 or 11 on a weeknight and then go to a bar after that and then get up and answer the bell and work the next day. And part of that is because they only have 2 drinks, or they're walking around while they have a drink, or they're hyper connected to each other. And so it doesn't actually feel that exhausting. Some of what we see with alcohol is this like binging mentality at all times. Right. The last thing I'll say about the optimization bros is I have this kind of, I don't know, soapbox I've been noodling on. Like, we got to stop making everything autistic. So a lot of these guys will be like, well, I'm going to stop drinking, but now I'm going to microdose mushrooms.
Right.
Have you ever been around somebody who's microdosing mushrooms? They're
Yeah.
annoying as shit. Whereas when you're at a bar and you can kind of tell, like, oh, everybody's had one drink and we're all kind of at this level, and then they've had
Yeah.
2 drinks and we're at this level. It's actually interesting when somebody rolls into your situation and they're like either super shit faced or totally sober, how it kind of throws things off. But most drugs are like super individualized. They allow you to be a complete narcissist with the experience you're having, but you're a pain in the ass to be around for everybody else. And so I didn't drink, you know this, Bridget, I didn't drink till I was 27 because I was a maniac. I was so focused on basketball. But it's been interesting to be an adult and watch kind of feast culture and how that does have value. Like, it would be nice if we could let go of our inhibitions without any substance at all, but we're still animals at heart. And so we have figured out that, like, wine and beer, for example, are a pretty good way to get people connected. It's not maybe the best way, but it's the best we've come up with.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. We were watching, I'm glad that I can still tap into that, I think, a little bit, just based on the comments we always get on Dumpster Fire, where it's like, I love watching someone who's, what was the one we got recently? It was like, I love watching creators who have a couple drinks before they record. I was like, I've still got it. That's good. That means that I'm coming across as uninhibited, which I do feel very much when I'm filming that. So I'm glad I can still somewhat tap into that and not maybe in the extreme ways I used to. But it is interesting to me to watch kind of the, like, drinking. It's wild how it's just like, you look at those numbers and it's just off a cliff.
Yeah.
Like, an entire generation has just stopped drinking. And I don't think it's because they don't like drinking. I think it's just they're getting their fix somewhere else. They're just addicted to their phones and dopamine. And I've been saying this for a while about how why would you go out to a bar if you could just sit on your couch and get your brain blasted with rewards?
Totally. I mean, and it's also like interesting how, in part because of COVID, but of course it started long before that, like how unaware of how socially inept people have gotten.
Yeah.
Like how unaware of how socially inept people have gotten, in that, like, so we host a lot of events here at the Process, and I'm amazed at the number of people who are like, oh yeah, I don't drink. And you'd be like, okay, cool. Well, do you have a battle plan for like how you're going to interact with people? Because like historically, one of the best ways is like, hey, can I get you a drink? I'll go to the bar. Like, it just creates the chaos. And again, maybe that's not the best solution, but it's the best we've come up with. But like, people who will just sort of show up to things and be like, okay, entertain me. And you're like, motherfucker, you got to figure it out. Like, like, again, that's great that you're not drinking, but if you're not going to drink, you better come with some funny shit to say, or like some connections or some questions or whatever. It's this weird, like, again, it's kind of making everything autistic, where people are like, I expect now to be entertained in this way, and then I will go over here and be entertained in this way. And if I'm looking for a date, I will go onto this dating app. And if I'm looking for a job, I will go on LinkedIn, as opposed to the reality of the messiness of life, which is that they're all mixed up. And that's cool. And that's great. Like, I actually love that.
Yeah, we might be the last generation that remembers this, though. Just
I don't
like
know.
we might be the last generation that remembers how to read a book.
I think young people are actually, I think older people have no immunity against this stuff. So they're super screwed, right? Our generation, we at least saw it coming. We're still kind of screwed, and then people slightly younger than us are kind of hyper screwed. But I see with like way younger people that in some ways they're all like, this is dumb. Why are you guys behaving this way? Like, this internet stuff is stupid. I don't care.
Yeah. Maybe there will be just a natural reversion to normal. I don't know.
What do you think about? Okay.
I get in front of a lot of young crowds, and it's weird because the cultural differences are so vast. I almost have no idea how to relate to them, and I do not know what motivates them at all or moves that. Like, it's not just. It's like they're a different species of human. It's weird.
I see that too. I do a fair bit of public speaking, and I used to love speaking at colleges, and now I'm just like, oh wow, can I not get through? I think in some ways they actually enjoy it. They just don't know how to show that they're enjoying it. Like most people will be like nod or laugh or clap or whatever, but they're just kind of like, again, they're like the Roman emperor who's like, entertain me, but they're not going to, they'll just at the end either do this or this. And
Yeah,
that's it,
exactly.
right? There's no
They're like,
feedback.
I can't like downvote this. What's
Yeah,
going
there's no
on?
feedback along the way. What do you think about, so my brother and I talk a lot. My brother makes charts and is kind of Instagram famous, and he made his way through creating content online. And one thing he saw when his first book came out was that he was doing exactly what he did online. It was almost all new stuff, but he couldn't sell any books to all of these people. And he and I talk a lot about the idea of like dead internet theory, which would be that like,
we talk about this too.
No one's actually engaging with the internet. It's just sort of happening around us. And I see that even with my stuff where like people will observe it and sometimes they'll tell me later, like, oh, I saw that thing you posted and I really like what you're doing. And I'm like, well, then hit the goddamn like button or something. So I know that it's happening. But I think it's becoming a bit of a monolith that people are just like aware exists, and we can use it for, again, booking hotel rooms, but we're not engaged with it in the way that we were 10 years ago, which in some ways makes me kind of sad because I actually really loved the internet in the early days, but in other ways makes me happy because I think it's kind of the destruction of humanity. So are we hastening that? Are people realizing like it's actually like not that helpful to have a social media presence because it looks good, but it doesn't actually move the needle on commerce or influence?
But where are they engaging then?
Well, I think people are actually getting more back to just being in person. I find that, in running a business, our Instagram and Facebook ads used to drive a lot more traffic. Now it's much more word of mouth. It's much more hanging up posters. It's putting stickers up. In some ways, the internet techno lords have convinced us to spend all of this time and energy creating content and spending on advertising, but it doesn't seem to work anymore. And I don't know what that is. I'm wondering what you are seeing from all the people you talk to.
I have similar feelings about it. Like I'll go into the green room and everyone's like, "Oh, your clips, I love them. Like I use your stuff to figure out how to think about that." Way more people than it seems are watching it. It's like there's a certain disconnect there, and I'm not sure. There's so much content and everybody's creating content, and I don't know if that's what we're all going to do when AI takes everyone's jobs and we all have a universal basic income, and like that's the only way they know how to placate all of us is we're all just going to become content creators. Or if people are, I think after COVID there definitely is like a thirst for live comedy, live music, all of the things that we took for granted. But I don't know that I think a lot about the dead internet theory because of just all the bots and now all AI and no one. I think what's my feeling about what's happening, and I don't know that I can articulate it because I'm just thinking out loud right now, is that humans are starting to get an uncanny valley feeling about the internet as a whole. So as it becomes populated with foreign agents running accounts and they don't know, like you said, humans like information. The internet used to give you information. Now people have no idea what's real. They don't know if it's the correct information. I think what's happening is people are naturally turning away from these places where they're not sure if they're going to send. Nobody likes to be embarrassed either. So people don't like sending things to their friend and then having their friend go, "That's fake. Like that's not real. You fell for that. You're a rube." So I think this is again a very new thought I've been having is with that uncanny valley thing is very real that humans have because it means something's dead. That's where it comes from. What is alive? That the uncanny valley is, I'm afraid of a thing that isn't human but looks human. Well, that's a corpse. Like that is anciently a corpse, the thing that looks human but isn't alive. And I think people are having that, like, to your point, the internet might be dead, but I think the reaction to that is humans are having an uncanny valley feeling about the entire internet. And it's why micro communities are thriving. Like, my Substack is amazing and people are all engaging. And places like Two Way, which are video and it's people talking, like Mark Halperin's site, that's booming and thriving. And I get recognized from that all the time lately, which is crazy. And more than even being on Rogan or something like that. So something's shifting. I don't know what it is. But I do get the sense that humans don't like being tricked, and they don't like being embarrassed, and they don't like feeling like a fool, and they don't like being confused. And that is pretty much all they're getting from the internet. And until these platforms realize that the AI stuff, like, people, the most heartwarming thing is every time you see AI slop put out there, all the comments are just slop, AI garbage, unfollowed, slop, fuck you, AI. Like, people hate it. They don't like it. So I don't know. I think until these platforms figure out how to deal with the truly foreign countries manipulating all the politics and all the people online and buying these bot farms, and until they realize that people don't really like the AI stuff, we're gonna be in this weird uncanny valley where everything feels a little bit. It feels the same way to me, like it's dead. And the internet as we know it is dead. There's no going back to that. So I'm just curious to see what thrives and what is replacing it out of that dead internet.
Yeah, I think you're right that people are craving connection. Sometimes I think about, or I used to think about, how the internet is trying to return us to a village mentality, right? So if you think about Yelp, okay, so Yelp would be, I don't know this city, but a bunch of people have reviewed the restaurant, which is kind of similar to if we all lived in a little village and we'd be like, don't go down to Bridget's place, dude. You're going to poop a lot if you go there.
Yeah, exactly.
And that some of, reputation building online is kind of that village mentality. Like we were trying for that, but now people realize just the enormity of it. And maybe that because we gave so many people the option to create, which is not wrong, it's just the natural way of things, that has caused people to understand just how big it is. Like when we were first on the internet, I think we were kind of like, oh, there's this place and there's a few creators, but mostly we're kind of consuming. But you turn everybody into a creator, and then the enormity of it becomes clear, and people don't love enormity. They want like a kind of village feel. So now maybe it is that the very nature, or the very thing that we thought was going to keep it going, like social media and making everybody be able to contribute, is what contributes to its downfall, because it becomes so clear that it's too big to just manage for our brains in some way. Because like you said, like I honestly, like, Facebook gets a bad rap. I kind of like seeing what's going on with my high school friends and like the chaos that they're going through, but I never get to see that anymore because now I'm just being fed like, aren't you interested in the clips from that Spanish basketball team that you once played for? Like, no, not really. I don't care about that. Now that was just the natural way of it, because it was going to get commercialized at some point. But I do think I'm amazed at the number of people I meet who don't have social media now. Like, and I'm heartened by that. And I also am amazed when I see somebody post something and they haven't posted in like a year. I'm like, oh, good for them. Like, that's awesome that's the way people are behaving. And I'm wrestling with it all the time. Like, as somebody who's running a business, kind of trying to create stuff, I'm always kind of, not always, but in this last year, like, what is the point of even doing any of this?
Yep.
As opposed to just posting manifestos on a church like Martin Luther. I think that's the future, is just like.
It's funny because as you said that, I was like, in my brain, when Maggie will kill me for this, but I was like, Uncle Ted was right. Like, my feeling is that there will be two communities of people, and some are just going to go full Luddite, and Uncle Ted will be their hero, and they'll be posting manifestos on trees. And then another group will figure out how to harness AI. They'll probably be uber wealthy. They'll be downloading their, consciousness into the cloud. Like those are the two paths I see diverging between us. And,
we're basically gonna end up in Demolition Man. Like it's interesting that almost all post-apocalyptic movies, there's this sense of like kind of an unfinished utopia. And I think that's what we see often, where the tech overlords are like, if we could just get everything right, but then they stop right before that because they get overwhelmed or whatever. And then like the doors don't totally close on the spaceship or whatever that thing is. I think that's maybe that we were right about all of that prediction around like, it's going to look cool, but mostly beaten down. The Taco Bell drive-through thing will not really work. Like, I mean, that's what we see with like, I'm of course in airports a fair bit, and like touchless faucets, like shit doesn't work. Sorry. like that's the touchless faucet is kind of like a version of this future that is probably more realistic, where like it'd be great, but it doesn't actually work. So therefore, then there's a lot of us who are just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go wash my hands in a basin. Like it's
exactly. What's your biggest defect of character?
My biggest defect of character?
Mm-hmm.
They say in screenplays, you should always have somebody say to a person like at a bar, you know what your biggest problem is? Because that's like funny. A good little way to illustrate like what the character's flaw is.
Oh, that's really funny.
My biggest character flaw is trying to. I was talking about this with somebody the other day that I saw it articulated well in a piece in this magazine, this like quarterly magazine called American Affairs that I really love. So for those who are listening, I highly recommend. It's this idea that I think we were sold, our generation was sold on this idea of like anybody can be president, just as a metaphor, in that we can all solve all of the world's problems instead of thinking in terms of how can I help 12 people or 50 people or 150 people. So maybe my biggest character flaw that I have to work on is delusions of grandeur, right? So I think I thought when I was young that if I could be a famous basketball player, my problems would be solved. And also that was my lot in life. And I actually got really, really close to that. I mean, I was a pretty mediocre NBA basketball player, but I was a good professional basketball player across the board, and felt some touch of like what it's like to be famous and realized that doesn't make you happy. But then I think I've also fallen into the trap of thinking that I needed to help everyone. That I think we were all a little bit sold on that it wasn't enough to help one person or 5 people. And that's my great test now, is that if you're not interested in what I'm doing, I have to not give a shit. Not because I'm mean or uncaring or ambivalent even, just that like I can only help those who are interested in being helped and who are interested in my tone and the way that I like move through the world. And that's actually like a lot healthier as a way to be. And so in some ways that's where the internet causes me problems. It causes, I think, a lot of problems because it gives us this false impression that we are our own little god.
I know. We're seeing that a lot online this week with the influencers. Like, oh, it turns out you were influencing each other and you're in a bubble.
Right. Yeah. And I think to that end, like I listen to Matt Taibbi and Walter Kern a lot, their podcast, America This Week. And I'm just amazed at the amount of life experience and wisdom that they have, not just around like politics, but also just media, the way that information is presented to us. And I will think to myself sometimes like, oh, it'd be fun to be on their podcast. And they're like, oh no, you wouldn't know what the fuck you're talking about, because it's not my lane really. I mean, I of course have lived long enough and traveled enough to know a little bit about this stuff, but it's understanding how can I apply my lens to be helpful, to create stuff that's interesting and to me, to make myself laugh from time to time, make a few people that are like me laugh, but that I don't have to make everyone laugh. I don't have to connect to everyone. And that I can listen to Walter Kern and Matt Taibbi and glean a lot from them without thinking I need to be like them.
Yep. What's your biggest asset?
It is probably being able to land in a situation and figure it out really quickly. I had to do that so often in basketball where I would, so I played for a team in Kazan, Russia, and I was kind of amazed by my ability to get into this situation where, like, Kazan is on the Volga River. It's 500 miles east of Moscow. There's one flight from Moscow to there every day, or at least there was when I was playing there. The team picked me up in a windowless van in the night and drove me to my hotel. And I spent so much time worrying about, like, not just how am I going to play, but how am I going to figure out how this team works so that I can fit into it. I had that same kind of situation happen when I was in Des Moines recently, where I went to this dinner and I was at first like, how the hell am I going to make sense of, like, who's friend, who's foe, who's going to hang out? But, like, by the end of the night, it is winnowed down to, like, the 8 of us who are cool.
Yeah, exactly.
But, like, it's the 8 of us who kind of like to talk to people and are just able to emote and empathize and figure out, like, what's going on in a room. And I don't know that I necessarily was this way from birth. I think sports taught me a lot about having to figure out how to get along in a group that I wouldn't necessarily be in otherwise. Like, the first basketball team I played for that was not my high school team, I went into Topeka and played for a team where it was me and one other white kid and everybody else was black. In Kansas City in the summer league, there was a time where I was in a gym where I was the only white person in the gym, right? Like, you can imagine basketball is, like, not a particularly white sport. And it was situations like that where I had to figure out, like, how to maintain the own integrity of my personality while also being able to fit in, that I think became kind of a weird superpower that I never planned on and never, like, set out to get. And what's interesting about it was, if you take that example of me being in largely black culture, some white guys would try to adopt black culture, and that meant that the black guys lost complete respect for them, right? So it was interesting how it's not only you had to fit in, but you also had to maintain some sense of who you are, which is that balance in any of these situations that you get into. Me being in Russia and not trying to, like, be Russian, but be an American in Russia who, like, understands the culture, is going to stick to my own values, but also can be flexible enough to understand that, like, I'm the stranger here. And so I should probably, like, figure out how they talk to each other.
Yeah. I love that. Where can we find you?
Where can we find us? These days, I guess Twitter still. X, I guess Paul, then Shirley. If people are interested in what we're doing in Denver, it's theprocessdenver.com. And
the book.
That's my new book.
Can we get the book?
Mr. Bezos' site is probably your best bet.
Okay.
Yeah, people sometimes will be like, oh, I don't want to buy it from Amazon. I'm like, well, the alternative is not buying it. That doesn't help me any. So, like, I get that there's going to be a middleman, but that's how the world works. It's not like Bill Barnes and Steve Noble are any, like, better. Those are not.
Yeah.
People. So anyway, yes, the new book is The Art of Focused Work, and I'm proud that it's out in the world. And my dissertation.
I loved it. Yeah. Thank you for, so much of what I do is made possible because of your teaching. So I am very grateful to you for being in the world, but also for helping me be productive. And we'll see you again.
Thank you for listening, because there's times where I will say something, I'm like, Bridget might scream at me about this, but
no,
you're always,
don't be crazy.
You're always up for ideas, which I
love ideas.
So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.